I want you to imagine for a moment your life with and then without Jesus. I want you to imagine yourself as you are right now, with your hopes, your dreams, your desires, your fears, your anxieties, maybe the things that make you happy or sad. And I want you to think of all of the things, from the things that are private and personal to you, all the way to the things on the global scale that you might think about or that affect your life in some way. And I want you to imagine all of that together with and then without Jesus. And I want you to imagine the difference that knowing Jesus might make. My own story, my own with or without Jesus, is a story about fear and about hope. I don't know if it'll ring true to your life and to your experiences, that research shows us that the average levels of fear and anxiety that a person experiences today are at the levels that would have been considered clinical just a generation ago. Social scientists tell us that we are living in the age of anxiety, or the age of fear, and many of the studies focus on teenagers. The average 14-year-old today is much more likely to be serious than a 14-year-old even a decade ago, more likely to focus on school and have a good work ethic, more likely to be responsible, less likely to take part in risky behaviors like smoking and drinking and drugs. Well, that sounds great, right? What's not to love? A generation that's really going somewhere. But then at the same time, the same studies tell us that your age group today are much more likely to feel like they can't control their lives, that they're under a crushing pressure, much more likely to suffer from fear and anxiety. And that's got me asking a few questions. The thing is, all of us fear something. Fear is the most primal, ingrained human emotion and experience. It is completely impossible to eradicate fear from your life. All of us fear something. Now, some fears are silly little fears, light-hearted fears that even we laugh at. In my early 20s, I once stood totally still on top of a tall bar stool in my room, staring down that killer of human beings, the house spider. Obviously, I couldn't leave the room, because if I left the room, the spider might move. I wouldn't know where it was, and then I'd never be able to sleep there ever again. And removing the spider myself was, for obvious reasons, not on the table. So I stood there, completely still, desperately hoping and waiting for my flatmate to come home for 45 minutes, praying my heart out, saying, God, please kill this spider. God, please kill this spider. Even now, I have two little ones, the gorgeous Georgia, who's 3, and Hudson, who's 11 months old. And if I ever am on my own with them and have to remove a spider, I literally chant to myself, show no fear, show no fear, show no fear, show no fear, because I don't want my little ones to think that spiders are scary, which, of course, they are. Some fears are light-hearted or silly, even we laugh at them. But some fears are very serious. I know that there have been fears in my own life that I've not even had the courage to voice, because they can loom so large in our thinking, and we think that if we even say them out loud, they somehow bring a reality to bear that we can't quite think about. Fear of the dark, fear of being found out, fear of people seeing the real you, the inside thoughts and attitudes of your hearts and not liking you. Fear of missing out, fear of being humiliated, fear of being bullied, singled out, not loved, not chosen. Fear of failure, fear of the dark things in our world, fear of evil. And even though we outgrow some fears over time and leave some fears behind, there are always other ones that come in. I don't know if you're familiar with the no fear posters. They were a big deal when I was growing up, and they all have this kind of crazy photo of some kind of circumstance or situation somewhere with a kind of motivational, inspirational tagline that's meant to be about living life on the edge. Great if you need a kind of soundbite pep talk, but I haven't found them to be actually particularly very helpful when I'm properly afraid. I don't know if you can no, you can't read the writing on that poster. It says, in order to rid yourself of fear, you must know fear, embrace it, and learn from it. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure that if you were to know that shark and embrace it, it wouldn't be your fear you were getting rid of. Where does this leave us? Do we just have to get on with our fears, live with the limp of fear, try and come up with some processes or systems that enable us to just live with our anxieties and our panics? Or is there a way of living life that is real about the darkness in the world and in our hearts, and yet somehow courageous, bold, free, full of love, full of joy, and ultimately full of peace? I found the Bible's comments on fear very interesting. Some of you may know that one of the most repeated commands of the Bible is fear not. Fear not, fear not, fear not, fear not, fear not. But I wonder if you'd be surprised to know that the Bible commands us to fear almost as often as it commands us not to fear. Do not fear what they fear. Do not take on their worries, but fear the Lord. Do not fear what they fear. In other words, the people who don't know God, the people who aren't living in relationship with God. Do not fear what they fear. Do not take on their worries, but fear the Lord. What might this possibly mean? Well, our fears and hopes are two sides of the same coin. All of us have longings, deep longings of different kinds, particularly a longing to be loved and to be accepted. It's a universal human longing. And the longing for significance. We want to know that our life counts somehow, that it amounts to something, that there is a purpose to our lives. And we put our hope in all sorts of people and with things that we think might enable us to fulfill those longings. And we become afraid or anxious when the things that we've put our hope in are under threat or attacked somehow, or when they prove not to be solid ground. I wonder what kinds of things you've put your hopes in, the things that you're trying to fulfill those longings. I wonder what kind of people you've put your hopes in. Are you on solid ground? It's not the coolest analogy I've ever used, but I recently watched the movie Frozen. Guys in the room, don't pretend you haven't seen it. And I think it actually does a pretty good job of showing us the effect that fear has on our lives. Now, it's hard, I realize, to talk too seriously about a cartoon character, but if you're really struggling to engage with the point I'm making because I'm using a Disney princess to make it, all I can say to you is, let it go. Thank you, Sharon Dirks, for that one. One of the main characters of the movie is a princess called Elsa, and she has these powers that she's desperately trying to hide. She's afraid that if people see the real her, that will be bad somehow, that they'll shun her or that she'll make a mistake. And this leads her to try and control her inner herself and the world around her more and more. Many of us actually do the exact same thing. We're afraid of failing. We're afraid of what people might think about us if they actually saw our inner selves. We're afraid of doing the wrong things or somehow of being the wrong thing. And we end up trying to control ourselves, our public image, and the world around us. We try and sieve our personality through what we think the world will find acceptable or lovable. But you know, fear is a funny thing. The more you try and control yourself and your world in order to make sure that your hopes are met and your fears allayed, the more you'll find that the world is actually controlling you. In other words, we end up not dissimilar to Elsa, shut up in our metaphorical house, the shutters down, increasingly less ourselves, increasingly boxed in and isolated. When our hopes are not secure and when our fears come to the fore, we live increasingly narrow, adventureless lives. We lead lives that are less ourselves, less creative, and we close in our horizons. Jim Martin writes in the Just Church, gifted students are seldom limited by intellect. What undoes them most often is fear of failure. You know, I wish I'd known that growing up. I led such a narrower life than I might otherwise have lived because I was so worried of trying new things in case I wasn't good at them and maybe I would look silly or embarrass myself somehow. Are there fears that are limiting your life? Or maybe I should say, what are the fears that are limiting your ability to live a full, courageous, love-filled, joy-filled, peace-filled life? In the book of 2 Kings in the Old Testament, God says, do not fear other gods, or bow down to them, or serve them, or sacrifice to them. Now, the language of other gods is not really a language that we use in our culture very often, but actually, to the extent that your hopes and fears begin to control you, they are like little gods running your life. And we can find that we do bow down to them, in the sense that we compromise our lives. We try and serve these hopes, these fears, hoping that they will give us what we want. And sometimes we're willing to sacrifice things, sacrifice our own well-being or even the well-being of others around us in order to make sure, look, I want this hope to be met and I don't want that fear to come true. It's so challenging. The Bible says, do not fear other gods. Do not bow down to them. Do not serve them or sacrifice to them. But it's really interesting that the sentence doesn't end there. You see, God knows that there's no point in telling you, do not be afraid. Fear is a universal human condition. It is impossible to eradicate. God doesn't just say, don't fear other gods. That's not where the sentence ends. Do not fear other gods, but fear the Lord. Fear the Lord. You see, the question isn't, will you fear? The question is, whom or what will you fear? Whom or what will you fear? I asked Siri a couple of weeks ago, Siri, what does God think about me? Siri answered, interesting question. I said, I know it is Siri, I asked it, but that's not very helpful. And she said, if you say so. I said, come on, seriously, Siri, does God love me? Thinking, okay, I'll give her a massive hint in the right direction. And she said, my policy is the separation of spirit and silicon. I've come to the conclusion that Siri doesn't know anything about her Bible, is stalling for time, and has a serious attitude problem. If Siri had known the God of the Bible, this is what she would have said to me. The most important and powerful person in the whole world, who is also the most gentle, the most kind, the most wonderful person in the world, God, knows everything about you, everything. The good, the bad, the ugly. He's real about you. There's no point hiding anything. There's no point hiding the bits that you're unsure of or embarrassed by. He knows you inside out. But the incredible thing is that when the eyes of God look on you, they look with love. His heart is bursting with love, with joy. He loves you. He thinks you're wonderful. He created you. He sees more beauty and grace and dignity and character and life in you than you can possibly imagine. He sees the very best version of who you could possibly become. He loves you completely, unconditionally, without any qualifications, without any catches, without any small print. He loves you whether you love him back or not. He loves you whether you obey him or not. He loves you whether you have a good day or a bad day. He simply loves you. He loves you. He loves you. And he'll never change his mind about you. Nothing you can do can ever get God to change his mind about his seal of approval saying, I love you. I don't know what you think God thinks about you. I want to somehow drill it home into your heart. God is for you. God is for you. But you know what? It's even more exciting than God loves you. God has the biggest adventure of a life planned for your life. the biggest adventure that you could possibly have, living in relationship with Jesus. He has an adventure for you. He has greatness planned for your life. He says, hey, I love you now. Come and follow me. I have an adventure, greatness ahead. You see, when you make the Lord your fear, when you put your hope in God, you decide that God's opinion of you is what will shape your life and your destiny. That you'll listen to his voice, his thoughts, that you'll care most what he thinks about you and about the world around you. That you will live for an audience of one. Now I'm going to try and give you a picture of what this might mean. We are going to enact a movie scene. I asked for a beautiful assistant. I was given Simon Edwards. Simon, if you could make your way on stage. Now, I want you to imagine the school statewide baseball championships in America. Simon's team are losing. Simon is the last batter, and he has a chance to turn it around. He is sweaty, under pressure. He doesn't think he can do it. It's not a home crowd. In fact, the loudest voices in the crowd are jeering against Simon, telling him he's rubbish, he can't do it, he's never going to make anything of his life. Then, as it does in the movies, the noise kind of fades into the background, and music rises up that is very inspirational and kind of can-do. And Simon locks eyes on the most important person in the room, me, his coach. And I say, mouth, in fact, in the movies in the cheesiest possible way, you can do it. You are amazing. You got this. I believe in you. Then it goes completely quiet. The pitcher pitches the ball. Not yet. There's a crack as the ball hits the bat, and then bam, Simon knocks it out of the park. Now we're going to do this. Are you ready? I'm going to count 3, 2, 1. Once I've done that, I want all of you to shout as loud as you can. You can't do it. You're rubbish. You're never going to make anything of... Sorry about this. Didn't tell him about that part. You're never going to make anything of your life. Then I will do that, which means shh. Simon will lock eyes on me. I will say, you can do it. I believe in you. And he's going to pitch the ball. Simon's going to knock it out the park. 3, 2, 1, go! You can do it. I believe in you. You got this. Wonderful Simon Edwards. When I asked him to do that, I said, Simon, how do you feel about being publicly humiliated? And he said, sure. Now, that's a bit of silly fun, really, but I want you to remember that moment. I want you to remember that scene, because that's what God is inviting you into. To let all of the other voices fade away, to let the voice of God be the voice that you listen to, the eyes of God be the gaze that you're looking at, to see the affirmation of God, the thoughts of God shape you and your destiny, and to find that everything else fades away into its right perspective in light of the greatness of God. To make God your fear and God your hope. It's a call to live in the adventure of God. There's a clip from an old sitcom called Father Ted. In one of the scenes, Father Ted is sitting in a caravan with his sidekick Dougal, and there are these little tiny plastic cows in front of him. And he says, now for the last time, these, pointing to the tiny little plastic cows, are small. The ones out there, pointing to the real cows in the distance, are far away. These, small. It's taking me some time to get this. That's fine, I'll give you a moment. These, small. Those, far away. These, small. Those, far away. Here's the thing. If God looks small to you, If you think he's not big enough to fill your vision and fill your heart, that you can't possibly live for that audience of one, you are standing too far away and you needn't. If you want to, you can invite him in to come close, to come into your life, and to start the adventure of living with God as your fear and God as your hope. And if you do that, you'll find that your life gets bigger. Your life gets bigger. You're free to be yourself, free to go against the crowd and stand up for what is good and true and pure, free to enjoy relationships without needing to impress anyone because God is already impressed with you, free to fail, free to grow, free to develop, free to change, simply free. Free. See, hope is not a flaky concept. It's not a wishy-washy, soft concept. Time and again, when the Apostle Paul is either in prison or in chains, the reason he gives for that, he says, I am in these chains because of the hope, and then he finishes the sentence of the resurrection of Jesus Christ of the gospel. Hope. True hope, hope in God, is the most audacious, bold, controversial, courageous way to live. Hope in God enables you to go against the flow and take your place in the bigger purposes of God. I want to end with one final thread and then we'll have a time of ministry. I want to talk about the fear of evil very briefly, the fear of bad things happening. One of the most famous verses in the Bible is in Psalm 23. It says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. It's really important that you remember this. It does not say, though I skip through the mountaintops where there are flowers. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. You know, the evil, the brokenness of this world is a real thing. It's come into this world because of bad decisions that we human beings have made. Every single one of us has contributed to it. When the Gospel of Luke talks about the power of evil in our world and on us, it talks about a strong man, fully armed, who guards his own prey. The forces of evil are that strong man, and we are the prey, caught up, tied up. But then it goes on to say, but when one stronger than he attacks him and overcomes him, he takes away his armor in which he trusted and divides his spoil. Jesus is that stronger man. Jesus is that stronger man. The reason that Christians celebrate the cross, that hideously gruesome way of dying, is that Jesus did not stay on the cross. He did not stay dead. He rose again, and in doing that overcame the power of evil, overcame the power of death, and set in motion the dawn of a new day. The truth is that God will one day conclusively deal with evil. Everything that has been done on this earth will be accounted for. Justice will be done. God has seen it all, and he will make it right. He will restore. He will rebuild. He will set right what's been lost and broken. But in the meantime, he says to us, you can trust me. I am big enough, strong enough to deal with evil in its entirety. And now, this side of eternity, he whispers to our sometimes tired hearts, you can trust me. I am big enough, strong enough to comfort you in this journey and walk you through it. Remember Simon Edwards once saying, God doesn't say, fear not, for I will make the bad things go away. He says, fear not, for I am with you. If you are going through a dark time right now, the fear of evil, God says, I am going to walk this journey with you. You can know the comfort of my spirit. You know, often we get afraid worrying about future evil, things that we think might happen in the future. It's really important that you remember God says he gives us grace in the moment. He doesn't give us grace for a hypothetical future event. You can trust God that if he asks you to walk a journey, he will in the moment give you grace for that journey. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. How do we deal with fear? With anxiety? Well, you can't just get rid of it. It's impossible to eradicate. You transfer it into something bigger, better, stronger, into God. And you let him fill your vision, and you let everything else grow smaller, dimmer, and to be put into right perspective in light of the greatness of God. I started by asking you to imagine what life might look like with and then without Jesus, and the difference that knowing Jesus might make. I told you that my own story was one of fear and then hope. Last year I wrote in 100 words the nutshell of my story with God, and here it is. I'll read it to you. My with or without Jesus. Without Jesus, I am anxious, frightened, insecure, worried about what people think of me, scared about evil in the world and how out of control it is, hopeless about getting justice. Jesus makes me free, strong, courageous. No need to worry about myself anymore, how people will view or judge me. I know God sees my weaknesses, loves me anyway, and is committed to me becoming the person I was created to be. I trust God with the future. I know he'll bring justice. He comforts me in the present and draws me into the adventure of transforming this world. This is my story in a nutshell. I wonder what your story will be. I want to give you an opportunity to step into the greatest adventure of them all, the adventure of making God your fear and God your hope. Every single one of you will have one of these cards in your seat. I wonder if you can pick it up now, together with the card that Simon was talking to you about. I asked the team to print out these cards. Here it is. This is the symbol of our fears and our anxieties. Here is the symbol of your fears and anxieties. I'm inviting you today to make an exchange. I'm not saying to you, do not be afraid. I'm not saying to you, stop being afraid. I'm inviting you. God is inviting you to make an exchange, to exchange your previous fears, your previous hopes, and say that from this day forward, I have in my hand a little anchor. It's the sign for hope. It's a little keychain. And I'm inviting you to exchange your previous fears, your previous hopes, and say that from this day forward, the Lord will be my fear. The Lord will be my hope. I will live for an audience of one. You might never have been a Christian in the past, but today you're saying, I'm in. Count me in. Or you might have been a Christian for some time, but actually this exchange has not happened in your heart. I'm going to invite you to come forward in a moment, not just yet. Can you bring your black postcard with you? We're going to collect them in, and someone will give you at the front as they pray for you this little anchor to take with you on your keychains and remember every day the commitment that you made in front of God today.